welcome to the complete animation of Spirit from the 2021 animated feature film Spirit Untamed. Now, this movie, well, it's a good thing that this complete animation is over 20 minutes long because I have some things to say about this movie. When I first saw it, I had mostly negative feelings about it. And the reason why is because this movie had no reason, had no business incorporating the Spirit name into anything. It's like there are only three things. Beyond that, this movie has nothing to do with Spirit. And I want to really emphasize that this movie literally needed nothing to do with Spirit, and nothing would change in the movie. They could give the horse a different name, they could give the movie a different title, and this movie would be identical. And that bothered me when I first saw the movie. There are other things that bothered me about the movie, like the face. The face of the main character's aunt. Her face is like into one model. Her face is like, I think that is the one thing in this movie that visually irks me above everything else. And I'm gonna surprise everybody. I really like this movie. I really like it. Because of its visuals. Just because of its visuals. Because I like what it does with horses. It turns out that there aren't that many movies about horses. And even though this movie kind of steals the name and likeness of a much better movie, I can appreciate all the horses that are in it, because it turns out that when you just start looking at the horses, and he is so well animated. It's like you can tell that whoever animated this horse knew horses. They'd been around horses. They'd studied horses. They'd seen how horses move. Like earlier where he was eating a bunch of apples, only somebody who knows what horses are like would know to really just do weird stuff with their lips. Like, have their lips go like stretch way out to almost be like a pair of pre-teeth before they actually start chewing. And technically, this movie has a lot to be impressed with. The detail in the fur and the hair is really good. And this is where I'm going to start comparing it to the 2002 film visually. The 2002 film Spirit Stallion of the Cimarron, character's relationship with the other two girls, nothing really impressive or really desirable there. And so when I watched this movie for the first time, all of those things were front and center, because that was the story that was being, explicitly told. But when I came back to make this complete animation, all of a sudden, this movie clicked for me. If you focus in on the horses and the gorgeous Western landscapes, this movie is transformative. It's like, hey, a bunch of the themes that were front and center in Stallion of the Cimarron? What if those were sort of hidden beneath a layer of chaff, but still present in a sort of knockoff story, follow-up, not sequel thing? All of a sudden, there is a lot that I like in this movie. And the environments continually impress. There are so many times in this movie where it just shows off a landscape, and it's like, oh, be still my heart. This is speaking my language. I grew up in the Mountain West, and I have an almost romantic feeling towards mountains and forests and big blue skies with billowy clouds. Yeah, I'm a sucker for landscapes. A real sucker for landscapes. And this movie is able to about spirit and make every human character secondary at best and just like part of the world for most of the time. Because it's like all of the things that they show here could have been so cool if it was just horses. Horses that don't talk. In fact, it would be even more artistically bold if this movie had no humans and it also didn't have any Matt Damon narration. It's like, it literally is just these horses going on this exact same adventure. I think that there is plenty in this movie that just looks good. And, you know, anybody who knows me about and my tastes in animation, visuals trump everything else. It's like Raya and the Last Dragon, I absolutely adored my time looking at that, even though the story and characters and world, it's like there was so much about Raya and the Last Dragon that I didn't like, but the visuals were right there. And through the course of making this complete animation video, I think that Spirit Untamed is a really good movie. And by that, or not, maybe not a really good movie, but it's a movie that I really enjoy. And this part right here is probably the bit where they were able to use the visuals they had to the greatest effect, showing that, like, just how precarious it would be to be riding a horse. And so it's like, it feels like this movie's artists were almost sneaking in bits of quality where there almost shouldn't have been by design. Because, let's face it, the actual story of this movie is about the humans. And my suspicions were that if I made the complete animation of Spirit, the horse, if I made that complete animation, it wouldn't even be half of the running time of the movie. And I was right. The movie's what, like over an hour long? And this complete animation is only 22 minutes long. My guess is that if I scrubbed through the footage again and made it so that it was the entire movie, but only when horses are not on screen, it would be more than half an hour. Which means that this horse movie doesn't have nearly enough. This scene right here, a scene where it's around a fire in the middle of the wilderness in the West. Like, that scene could have been so good. But let's face it, this movie had its target demographic. And it leans into that target demographic so hard it almost hurts. You have... It's like the three girl characters, you know, lighthearted, high-flying adventure in the West. But the only way that they would be able to make that movie is if they pitched it such that they would be able to capitalize on a brand and capitalize on a historically very exploitable audience. It's like, you know how many billions of dollars have been made by merchandising to this particular demographic. And it's like there are so many scenes where the horse is dead front and center, good pose, good lighting, good everything, like right here. And they just have to throw, the little girl in front. And, ugh. It's like the parts of this movie that I really like. It's like the parts of this movie that I like feel like they were made for me. People who think like me, feel like me, they made those parts of this movie. And I was able to kind of get right into those through footage the way I do. You really get to be like pretty intimately familiar. One of the things that I noticed is they use a whole lot of per object motion blur in this. And I think that this movie has it competently done. Unlike Rio from 2011. Yeah, I think that the problem with Rio was that they wanted to implement motion blur, but they didn't know how yet. Because this movie, it actually has a lot of motion blur, but when you look at it, it actually works. And I think that Rio's problem is that they just tried too much too soon with that particular technique. Because even the movie that they released the exact, like the very next year, Ice Age Continental Drift, that one had a ton of motion blur, but it didn't look nearly as bad. And so, yeah, I think that the industry as a whole has done a good job knowing how to implement motion blur in 3D movies like this. Parts. Thanks for watching.